Good morning. My topic is white slavery. The black eye of slavery in America began with the whites enslaving their own people. Today I'm going to give you the background of the original slaves and how slavery was able to flourish in America for over 240 years. We must first understand who these original white slaves were, why they came to America in the 1600s, and how these white slaves were eventually replaced by African slaves. The original slaves came from Britain at a time when the population was all white. These original slaves were called indentured servants, which means they were slaves with a contract. The indentured servant was a person, male or female, white, and between the ages of 10 and 35. Each person would have to sign a contract that said they would work for a master in America for a certain amount of years. In exchange, the indentured person would receive food, clothes, a place to stay, and transportation to America. Most of the people were tricked or kidnapped into becoming an indentured servant. In the 1600s, kidnapping was big business. The kidnappers would lure children with candy, bait men and women with dinner and liquor. After a night of food and liquor, a man or woman would just about sign anything, not knowing that they were signing up to be slaves. Some of the children were even younger. They were sometimes taken by force from their poor parents. The government thought that the children should be with more respectable parents. These kidnapped children were taken to America to work as servants for a master until they reached 21 years old. America needed bodies to work, and Britain had bodies they wanted to get rid of. According to Jordan Walsh's White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America, Britain's population had surged by 1 million in a 75-year period. New laws have been passed that created classes of the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots had become beggars and drifters. With the dramatic increase in this segment of population, the British wealthy felt overwhelmed by this group of poor. Britain's answer to this problem: put them in jail. The jail soon became the hub for cheap labor into America. The new settlers in America learned early on that the soil was ripe for growing tobacco, a booming cash crop at the time. Growing tobacco was a year-long operation and required a large number of people to plant and pick tobacco. Ballard's White Servitude in the colony of Virginia talks about thousands of white men and women working in the tobacco fields for the Virginia Tobacco Company. Newly kidnapped Africans brought to America were much better suited for work in the tobacco fields, and they had no contract. The concept of indentured servitude would not last much longer. Masters were subject to the bindings of the contract they had with their white slaves. They were required by law to provide shelter, food, and clothing to their slaves. And when that contract was up, usually between 5 and 7 years, they had to free their white slaves. Give them some tools, corn, and a parcel of land. Once the white slave was freed, he could easily blend into society where he looked like everyone else. As the African slave trade increased, the need to bring whites from Britain decreased. And by 1675, as noted in the Law Library of Congress, the colonial government had passed laws that made Africans slaves for life. White slavery had been replaced with African slavery. America's history of slavery is a black eye to her rich history. When we talk about slavery in America, we always reference the Africans that were enslaved for 188 years. But we forget, whether by ignorance of the history or purposely, that slavery began with white British citizens. Race relations in the United States are still a big issue, and it stems from slavery. So before we judge each other, remember, we are all probably descendants of slaves, white and black. Thank you.